My name is Cassandra Mitchell, and I'm 32 years old. I never thought I'd be standing in a hospital corridor outside the dialysis unit, clutching medical test results that would change everything. The phone call from my father still echoed in my mind. "You owe me a kidney, Cassandra. After everything I've done for you. After everything he'd done for me?" This was the same man who spent 32 years calling me his biggest mistake, his burden, his disappointment. Now, with kidney failure ravaging his body, he expected me to save his life. The envelope in my trembling hands contained the compatibility test results, and I knew whatever was inside would force me to make the most difficult decision of my life. Before we dive into this incredible journey of family betrayal, medical crisis, and ultimate redemption, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button if you're ready for a story that will completely shock you. Make sure to subscribe because trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when those test results get revealed. This story has more twists than a medical thriller, so let's get started with how a lifetime of abuse led to the most unexpected demand imaginable. Growing up in the Mitchell household meant walking on eggshells around a man who viewed my very existence as a cosmic joke played at his expense. My earliest memory was from age 7, standing in our cramped Denver kitchen while my father stumbled through the door, alcohol heavy on his breath and rage blazing in his bloodshot eyes. "You ruined my life, you little mistake," he slurred, pointing an accusatory finger at me while I clutched my worn teddy bear. "If it wasn't for you, I could have been somebody important." My mother Sarah would rush to intervene with her usual repertoire of excuses. "He doesn't mean it, honey. He's just stressed from work. Your father loves you very much." But even at 7, I could see the lie in her desperate eyes and hear the uncertainty in her voice. The contrast between how my father treated me versus my older brother Derek was like night and day. Derek was 4 years my senior, blessed with athletic ability, natural charisma, and most importantly, my father's unwavering approval. While Derek's bedroom walls were covered with football trophies and academic achievement certificates that my father proudly displayed to neighbors, my accomplishments were met with skeptical dismissal. "Don't get too proud, Cassandra," became his standard response to my report cards, even when they showed straight A's. "Pride comes before the fall, and you've got a long way to fall." Derek basked in the warmth of our father's attention while I learned to navigate the cold shadows of his indifference and contempt. The pattern of emotional abuse became as predictable as Denver's afternoon thunderstorms. Birthday parties where my father would disappear to the neighborhood bar, leaving my mother to make excuses about important business calls. School events where he would show up only to criticize my performance publicly, comparing me unfavorably to Derek or other children. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" became the soundtrack of my childhood, a constant reminder that I was falling short of some impossible standard. During Derek's football games, my father would cheer so loudly that other parents would turn to stare, his pride radiating across the bleachers. When I performed in the school choir, he would check his watch and complain about wasting his Saturday. Financial manipulation became another weapon in my father's arsenal of control. While Derek's college fund grew fat with regular contributions and celebration, mine remained mysteriously stagnant. "College is for people who can't make it in the real world," my father would tell me, while simultaneously bragging to neighbors about Derek's acceptance to Colorado State University. I learned early that nothing in our house was truly mine, that everything came with strings attached and could be taken away at my father's whim. Even gifts felt like transactions, accompanied by lectures about gratitude and reminders of how much I owed the family. By age 14, I was working part-time jobs at local businesses, not for spending money like other teenagers, but to contribute to household expenses. My father insisted that since I was costing the family money, I needed to start paying my way. Meanwhile, Derek received a generous allowance for simply existing and breathing the same air. I would come home exhausted from stocking shelves at the grocery store, only to face interrogation about every dollar I earned and accusations of selfishness if I dared to buy myself anything beyond basic necessities. "Money doesn't grow on trees," my father would lecture, while Derek drove around in the used car our parents had bought him for his 16th birthday. The first major betrayal came during my senior year of high school when I discovered that the college savings account I thought existed for me had been emptied to pay for Derek's law school application fees and LSAT preparation courses. My mother delivered the news with tears in her eyes and trembling hands. "Your father thinks Derek has more potential for success," she whispered, unable to meet my gaze. "He says you're too emotional for higher education anyway." The crushing weight of that revelation sent me into my bedroom, where I sobbed into my pillow while Derek practiced his victory speech for winning the mock trial competition. That night, I realized that no matter how hard I studied or how perfectly I behaved, I would never be enough for a man who had decided I was a mistake before I could even speak my first word. Desperation bred determination, and by the grace of academic scholarships and sheer stubborn will, I managed to secure a spot in Denver Community College's nursing program at 18. The acceptance letter felt like a golden ticket out of the toxic swamp of my family home, a chance to prove that my father's assessment of my worthlessness was fundamentally wrong. But even this victory couldn't escape his poisonous commentary. "Don't get too proud of yourself," he sneered when I showed him the scholarship notification. "Community college isn't real college, and nursing is just glorified maid service. You'll never amount to anything more than cleaning up other people's messes." His words stung like alcohol on an open wound, but I had learned to armor myself against his cruelty with dreams of a future where his opinion would be irrelevant. Working 3 jobs to support myself through school became my new normal, a juggling act that would have impressed circus performers. Mornings were spent in classes, afternoons at the hospital cafeteria serving food to patients and staff, evenings cleaning office buildings downtown, and weekends stocking inventory at a medical supply company. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, and meals were whatever I could grab between shifts. My textbooks were purchased used and highlighted with such intensity that previous owners' notes were completely obscured. While my classmates complained about difficult professors or challenging assignments, I was grateful for every moment I could spend learning something that would take me further away from the suffocating atmosphere of home. It was during my second semester that I met James Richardson, a fellow nursing student whose warm smile and genuine kindness felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. James came from the type of loving, supportive family I had only seen in television commercials and movie scenes. His parents called regularly to check on his studies and sent care packages filled with homemade cookies and encouraging notes. When he talked about his childhood, his eyes lit up with fond memories of family vacations, birthday celebrations that lasted all day, and parents who attended every school event with cameras and proud smiles. Being around James felt like learning a foreign language, one where affection was freely given and mistakes were met with understanding rather than rage. Our relationship developed slowly, built on study sessions in the library and conversations over cheap coffee in the student union. James never pressured me to share details about my family, but his patient presence gradually coaxed stories from the locked chambers of my heart. When I finally told him about my father's treatment, about the constant criticism and financial manipulation, James's face filled with such genuine shock and compassion that I almost didn't believe it was real. "No parent should ever make their child feel unwanted," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "You deserve so much better than that, Cassandra." For the first time in my life, someone was telling me that the problem wasn't with me, but with the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. But my father's ability to sabotage anything good in my life proved to have no limits. When he somehow discovered that I was in a relationship, his campaign of destruction began immediately. Fake emergencies started pulling me away from dates and study sessions as he would call my workplace claiming there were family crises requiring my immediate attention. When I would rush home, heart pounding with worry, I would find him perfectly fine, usually drunk, and smirking with satisfaction at having disrupted my plans. "You can't just abandon your family for some boy," he would lecture, as if the years of emotional abandonment he had subjected me to were somehow different. The sabotage escalated when my father began showing up at school functions, uninvited and often intoxicated, making a spectacle that humiliated me in front of professors and classmates. During our white coat ceremony, a sacred moment when nursing students receive their first professional uniforms, my father arrived late, stumbled into the auditorium, and loudly asked why they were wasting time on ceremonies for people who couldn't get into real medical school. The mortification burned through me like acid as every head in the room turned to stare, my achievement tainted by his presence. James tried to comfort me afterward, but the shame felt too heavy to shake off easily. The most devastating attack came when my father contacted several of my professors, spinning elaborate lies about my mental stability and suggesting that I was from a broken family and couldn't handle the stress of medical education. He painted himself as a concerned parent worried about my ability to care for patients, while secretly hoping to destroy my academic standing. Professor Patricia Henderson, my clinical instructor and the first adult who had ever truly believed in my potential, called me into her office with confusion and concern written across her face. "Cassandra, I received some troubling calls about your family situation," she said gently. "I want you to know that whatever is happening at home, it doesn't change what I see in you as a student and future nurse." Dr. Henderson became my first real ally, a lighthouse guiding me through the storm my father was determined to create. Derek's wedding during my final semester provided the perfect stage for my father's cruelest performance yet. As the father of the groom, he delivered a speech that praised his one successful child while pointedly ignoring my existence entirely. Standing there in my bridesmaid dress, purchased with money I had earned through countless hours of overtime, I felt invisible and worthless. When well-meaning relatives asked about my studies, my father would interrupt with dismissive comments about how some people need backup plans when they can't succeed in life. The breaking point came during the reception when I overheard him telling Derek's new in-laws that he only had one child worth bragging about. I ran from the reception hall, tears streaming down my face, and spent the rest of the evening crying in my car while James tried to convince me that my father's words said everything about him and nothing about my worth. Graduating from nursing school with honors felt like scaling Mount Everest in stilettos, an achievement that should have been impossible given the obstacles my father had placed in my path. When Denver Presbyterian Hospital offered me a position in their cardiac care unit, it seemed like validation that all the sleepless nights, all the sacrifices, all the tears had been worth something tangible. Dr. Henderson beamed with pride as she signed my recommendation letter, telling me that she had rarely seen a student with such dedication and natural compassion for patient care. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was building something that belonged entirely to me, a career that my father's poison couldn't touch. The honeymoon period of professional success lasted exactly 6 months before my father's jealousy and need for control reared its ugly head once again. As my confidence grew in the hospital setting and my bank account finally showed positive numbers, he began making increasingly aggressive demands for financial support. "You owe me for raising you," became his new favorite phrase, delivered with the same venomous certainty he had once used to call me a mistake. "All those years I put a roof over your head and food on your table, now it's time for payback." The mathematical logic was astounding in its selfishness. Apparently, the bare minimum legal requirements for childcare had somehow created a debt that would follow me for life. Derek's promotion to partner at his prestigious downtown law firm provided the perfect contrast for my father to weaponize. While I was saving lives and working night shifts in a hospital, Derek was making headlines in the Denver Business Journal and earning a salary that dwarfed mine by embarrassing margins. My father's Facebook posts became shrines to Derek's success, complete with professional photographs and lengthy descriptions of his son's accomplishments. Meanwhile, my life-saving work was dismissed as just a job, and my decision to prioritize patient care over maximum earning potential was characterized as further evidence of my poor judgment and lack of ambition. When I politely but firmly refused to hand over portions of my paycheck to subsidize my father's lifestyle, his retaliation was swift and devastating. The man who had spent decades undermining my self-worth suddenly developed an intricate understanding of professional sabotage tactics that would have impressed corporate espionage experts. He began by contacting my hospital supervisor, Linda Morrison, with carefully crafted lies about my supposed drug use and erratic behavior at home. "I'm worried about my daughter," he told her with practiced concern in his voice. "I've noticed some troubling signs that she might be using substances to cope with stress." As her father, I felt obligated to reach out before something terrible happens to one of your patients. The lies were so detailed and delivered with such apparent parental concern that they demanded investigation. My father claimed to have found suspicious paraphernalia in my room during family visits that had never actually occurred, described mood swings that were actually normal responses to his abuse, and even fabricated stories about catching me in compromising situations. He contacted the police to file false reports about my erratic behavior, creating an official paper trail that would support his narrative if anyone bothered to dig deeper. The web of deception was masterfully crafted by someone who had spent 32 years studying my vulnerabilities and planning for exactly this type of warfare. The second betrayal came from the person I least expected, my own mother. When the hospital investigation team contacted our family as part of their due diligence process, I desperately hoped that my mother would finally stand up to my father's lies and tell the truth about what really happened in our house. Instead, she called my supervisor personally to confirm my father's story, claiming that she too had noticed concerning changes in my behavior and expressing worry about my ability to care for patients safely. "I love my daughter very much," she told Linda Morrison with tears in her voice, "but I'm terrified that she's going to hurt someone if she doesn't get help." The woman who had birthed me, who had claimed to love me despite my father's abuse, had chosen to protect his lies rather than defend my truth. James proposed to me during the darkest week of the investigation, when my professional reputation hung by a thread and my future seemed uncertain. His proposal should have been the happiest moment of my life, but instead, it felt like accepting a life preserver while drowning in an ocean of family-created chaos. "I don't deserve this," I whispered as he slipped the modest diamond ring onto my finger. "I don't deserve you or happiness or anything good." The investigation ultimately cleared me of all wrongdoing when drug tests came back clean and my patient care reviews showed nothing but excellence and compassion. However, the damage to my reputation within the hospital was already done. Whispered conversations in hallways and suspicious glances from colleagues who wondered if there might be truth hidden behind the officially dismissed allegations. My transfer to the emergency department felt like starting over professionally, moving from the cardiac unit where I had built relationships and expertise to a chaotic environment where I was once again proving myself from scratch. My father's smug satisfaction at learning about the transfer was evident in his voice when he called to deliver his twisted version of support. "See what happens when you disobey me, Cassandra," he said with mock sympathy. "I tried to teach you respect and gratitude, but you had to learn the hard way. Maybe now you'll understand that family comes first, and family means contributing to the people who made your life possible." The man who had nearly destroyed my career was positioning himself as the victim of my supposed ingratitude, a level of manipulation that would have been impressive if it weren't so personally devastating. Planning a wedding should have been a celebration of love and hope for the future, but in my family, even the most joyous occasions became battlegrounds for control and manipulation. James and I had decided on a small, intimate ceremony that would fit within our modest budget, a simple affair focused on our commitment to each other rather than expensive displays that would drain our savings. The guest list was intentionally limited to close friends and immediate family, with a reception at a local community center and homemade decorations that reflected our practical approach to starting our life together. Everything about our planning process emphasized love over luxury, meaning over materialism, and the genuine celebration of two people choosing to build something beautiful together. The question of whether to invite my father created weeks of agonizing internal debate and heated discussions with James, who couldn't understand why I would even consider including someone who had caused me so much pain. "He's spent your entire life trying to destroy your happiness," James argued during one of our late-night conversations. "Why would you give him the opportunity to ruin our wedding day too?" But the pressure from my mother was relentless and emotionally manipulative in ways that exploited every guilt button she had installed during my childhood. "He's still your father, honey," she pleaded during tearful phone calls. Whatever problems you two have had, family forgives and moves forward. You don't want to regret excluding him from the most important day of your life. Derek added his own brand of pressure, positioning himself as the voice of mature reason while completely ignoring the reality of my father's treatment throughout the years. "Don't be so dramatic, Cass," he said with the dismissive tone he had perfected during childhood. "Just invite him and get it over with. It's one day, and then you can go back to whatever boundaries you think you need." The casual way he minimized decades of abuse and framed my reluctance as drama rather than self-preservation showed how completely he had internalized my father's version of our family dynamic. To Derek, I was still the overly sensitive mistake who made mountains out of molehills and couldn't appreciate how good I had it. Against every instinct screaming warnings in my head, I reluctantly agreed to include my father in our wedding plans, hoping that the significance of the occasion might inspire him to behave with basic human decency for just one day. The decision felt like inviting a tornado to a picnic while hoping it would decide to become a gentle breeze, but family pressure and my own desperate desire to believe that people could change temporarily overruled my better judgment. I told myself that maybe, just maybe, seeing me happy and successful would soften something in his heart and allow him to feel genuine pride in his daughter rather than the bitter resentment that had poisoned our relationship for 3 decades. The wedding planning process immediately became a nightmare of criticism, demands, and public humiliation that made me question every decision we had made about including my family. My father appointed himself the unofficial wedding coordinator, criticizing every choice we made while making demands that would triple our budget and transform our intimate celebration into the type of elaborate production we couldn't afford and didn't want. "You can't serve chicken at a wedding," he announced after learning about our menu plans. "What will people think about our family if we're too cheap to provide proper food?" When I explained our budget constraints, he accused me of being deliberately embarrassing to the family and suggested that James's family would judge them harshly for our modest choices. His demands escalated from annoying to outrageous as he insisted on traditional elements that had nothing to do with our vision for the day. He wanted a father-daughter dance despite never having danced with me at any point during my childhood, demanded that his drinking buddies receive invitations despite never having met James, and insisted on giving a speech that would highlight his role in raising a successful daughter. Every conversation about wedding details became an opportunity for him to remind me that ungrateful children who didn't respect their fathers usually ended up with failed marriages and miserable lives. The stress of managing his demands while trying to plan what should have been a joyful celebration left me exhausted and questioning whether the whole enterprise was worth the emotional toll. The ultimate sabotage came just 1 week before our scheduled ceremony, when my father launched a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to destroy not just our wedding but our entire relationship. He placed calls to James's conservative, traditional family with fabricated stories about my mental health history, criminal background, and sexual promiscuity that painted me as a dangerous and unsuitable partner for their beloved son. "I'm calling because I care about your family," he told James's parents with practiced concern. "My daughter has some serious problems that she's been hiding from your son, and I think you deserve to know the truth before they make a terrible mistake." He presented fake documents that he had somehow created, showing falsified police reports and medical records that supported his narrative of me as an unstable, dishonest person with a history of destructive behavior. James's family, who had welcomed me warmly for months and treated me with more kindness than my own relatives had ever shown, suddenly became cold and suspicious. His mother called him with trembling voice and tearful concerns about whether he was making the right decision. "Maybe you should postpone the wedding until Cassandra gets some help," she suggested with genuine worry. "We love you so much, and we just want to make sure you're not rushing into something that could destroy your future." The confusion and pain in James's eyes when he confronted me about these allegations felt like watching everything I had worked to build crumble in real time. Even though he knew me well enough to question the stories, the seed of doubt had been planted by people he trusted and respected. The third betrayal came from Derek, who not only failed to defend me against our father's lies but actively participated in the destruction by calling James to warn him about my supposed history of mental instability and family drama. "I love my sister," Derek told James with practiced sincerity, "but she's always been prone to creating problems and blaming other people for her choices. Our family has dealt with this for years, and I'd hate to see you get dragged into her chaos." The brother who had basked in parental favoritism for decades was now using that privileged position to endorse our father's character assassination, presenting himself as the reasonable family member trying to protect an innocent bystander from my alleged toxicity. Under the crushing weight of family pressure and planted doubts, James asked for a postponement of our wedding, claiming that he needed time to sort through the conflicting information and make sure we were making the right decision. The deposits were lost, the venue was cancelled, the invitations that had already been sent had to be retracted with embarrassing explanations, and my dreams of building a life with someone who truly loved me dissolved into the familiar pain of abandonment and rejection. My father's mission was accomplished. He had successfully destroyed the one relationship that had brought genuine happiness into my life, proving once again that his need for control was more powerful than any consideration for my well-being or future. The collapse of my relationship with James sent me spiraling into the darkest period of my adult life, a black hole of depression and despair that made every day feel like an endurance test just to keep breathing. James accepted a nursing position in Seattle, 3 states away from the toxic swamp of my family drama, and our communication dwindled to nothing as he tried to rebuild his life in a place where my father's lies couldn't reach him. The finality of losing him felt like having my heart surgically removed while I remained conscious, a pain so sharp and persistent that I sometimes caught myself holding my breath, hoping that unconsciousness might provide temporary relief from the agony. Financial devastation followed emotional destruction as the cost of cancelled wedding plans consumed what little savings I had managed to accumulate. The security deposit for our planned apartment was forfeit, the dress I had worked overtime to afford hung unworn in my closet like a ghost of dreams that would never materialize, and the engagement ring that had once symbolized hope and future happiness felt like a 100-pound weight on my finger. Unable to afford rent on my own and too proud to ask for help from the few friends who remained sympathetic to my situation, I was forced to move back into my childhood bedroom, returning to the scene of 32 years of psychological warfare with my tail between my legs and my spirit completely shattered. My father's daily torment in our shared living space felt like being trapped in a cage with a predator who had tasted blood and wanted more. "See?" he would say with satisfied smugness every morning over coffee, "I told you no one would want damaged goods. That boy was smart to run away before you could drag him down with your problems." The man who had orchestrated the entire destruction of my relationship was now positioning himself as a prophet who had predicted the inevitable failure, completely erasing his own role in creating the circumstances that drove James away. Living under his roof again meant enduring constant reminders of my failures, my inadequacy, and his superior understanding of how the world really worked. Sleep became elusive as I worked night shifts at the hospital to avoid spending daylight hours in the house, sometimes sleeping in my car between shifts rather than facing another evening of my father's psychological torture. The exhaustion was crushing, but it felt easier to deal with physical fatigue than to sit across the dinner table from someone who viewed my presence as confirmation of his worldview about my fundamental worthlessness. My mother moved through the house like a guilt-ridden ghost, occasionally expressing sympathy for my situation while carefully avoiding any admission of her own role in enabling my father's destructive behavior. Depression settled over me like a heavy blanket that made every simple task feel impossible to complete. Getting out of bed required heroic effort, eating became a mechanical process I performed to stay functional rather than for any pleasure or nourishment, and the future stretched ahead like an endless desert with no oasis of hope in sight. Dark thoughts began creeping into my consciousness during quiet moments, whispers suggesting that everyone would be better off if I simply stopped existing and saved them the trouble of dealing with my problems. The voice in my head sounded suspiciously like my father's, suggesting that maybe he had been right all along about my fundamental inadequacy and the burden I placed on everyone around me. The unexpected lifeline came from the most unlikely source, Mrs. Rose Campbell, our elderly next-door neighbor who had watched the Mitchell family drama unfold for decades from the privacy of her well-tended garden. Rose was in her 70s, a retired librarian with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a quiet wisdom that came from observing human nature without judgment. She had lived next door since before my birth, watching me grow up through the chain-link fence that separated our properties, and she had clearly drawn her own conclusions about the family dynamics that played out in our backyard. One evening as I sat crying in my car after another brutal day of my father's verbal abuse, she knocked on my window with a plate of homemade cookies and an invitation that would change everything. "Your father wasn't always like this," Rose revealed during our first conversation over tea in her cozy kitchen, surrounded by photographs of the grandchildren she adored and the books that had filled her professional life. Her words stopped me mid-sip as I tried to process the possibility that the monster I had known all my life might have once been different. "I knew your paternal grandmother, Elizabeth, before she passed away when you were just a baby. She was a lovely woman, and she talked about your father with such pride and love. Something changed in him after she died, something dark that grew over the years until it consumed the person he used to be." The idea that my father had once been capable of love and normal human emotion felt like discovering that gravity might be optional on certain days of the week. Rose's revelation about my grandmothers will send shock waves through my understanding of our family's financial situation and my father's increasing bitterness over the years. Elizabeth specifically mentioned a trust fund for her grandchildren in her will, Rose continued, watching my face carefully as this information sank in. "She wanted to make sure that you and Derek would have opportunities for education and a good start in life." I remember her talking about it during her final months, how excited she was to be able to provide for your futures even after she was gone. The news that there had been money specifically designated for my future, money that had mysteriously never materialized in my college planning, opened entirely new questions about my father's financial management and the true reasons behind my years of poverty and struggle. Fueled by a combination of desperate curiosity and growing suspicion, I began investigating my family's financial records with the determination of a detective working a murder case. Late-night forays into my father's home office revealed a treasure trove of documents that painted a picture of financial deception and deliberate manipulation that exceeded even my worst assumptions about his character. Hidden among insurance policies and tax returns, I discovered medical records dating back several years that revealed a shocking truth. My father had been diagnosed with chronic kidney disease long before his recent health crisis, and he had deliberately concealed this information from the entire family while his condition steadily deteriorated. The medical timeline revealed a pattern of doctor visits, specialists' consultations, and treatment plans that my father had hidden with the same energy he had once devoted to undermining my achievements. Blood test results showed declining kidney function, dietary restrictions that explained his increasingly erratic behavior around food, and medication lists for conditions I never knew he had. The documentation painted a picture of a man who had known for years that he would eventually need a kidney transplant, who had been living with the knowledge that his lifestyle choices and genetic predisposition were leading him toward organ failure, and who had chosen to keep this information secret while continuing to wage psychological warfare against the very people he might eventually need to save his life. The medical crisis that had been building in secret finally exploded into public view when my father collapsed during a Sunday dinner at Derek's suburban mansion, clutching his side and gasping for breath in a way that sent my sister-in-law running for the phone to call an ambulance. The scene was chaotic and terrifying, with Derek barking orders about which hospital to use while my mother wept over my father's unconscious form, suddenly confronted with the reality that her husband might be dying before her eyes. I watched the paramedics work with professional detachment honed by years of emergency room experience, noting the signs of advanced kidney failure in his skin color, his breathing patterns, and the way his body had begun retaining fluid in dangerous quantities. The family meeting called at Denver Presbyterian Hospital felt like a war council convened to discuss strategy for dealing with a crisis that would affect all our lives in profound ways. Derek took charge of the situation with his usual authoritative demeanor, speaking with doctors and coordinating family communications as if he were managing a high-stakes legal case rather than our father's medical emergency. Initially, I was excluded from these discussions entirely, relegated to waiting in the family lounge while the real family members dealt with important decisions about treatment options and long-term care planning. The message was clear. Despite being a trained medical professional with direct experience in exactly this type of crisis, I was still considered too unstable and unreliable to participate in serious family business. My mother's tearful phone call summoning me to join the family discussions came only after the doctors had explained the severity of my father's condition and the limited options available for treatment. "Please come, honey," she sobbed into the phone. "He's dying, and we need all the family together right now. I know you and your father have had your differences, but this is life and death." The manipulation was subtle but effective, positioning my years of abuse as merely differences while framing my potential participation in his care as a test of my basic humanity. The implication was clear: good daughters put aside petty grievances when their fathers face mortality, regardless of how those fathers had treated them throughout their lives. The hospital room scene felt like walking into an elaborate theatrical production designed to generate maximum emotional impact and guilt. My father, normally robust despite his drinking and poor health choices, looked shrunken and vulnerable in the hospital bed, connected to machines that monitored his failing bodily functions with electronic precision. The performance of weakness and humility was masterful, complete with tearful eye contact and whispered words that suggested a profound change of heart about our relationship. "Cassandra," he said with a voice made weak by medical crisis rather than genuine remorse, "I know I haven't been the father you deserved. I'm sorry for all the times I let my anger get the better of me." Derek's revelation about the need for a kidney transplant was delivered with the matter-of-fact efficiency of a business presentation, complete with statistics about success rates and recovery times that he had clearly researched thoroughly. "The doctors say Dad needs a transplant within the next 6 months, or his chances of survival drop dramatically," he explained to the assembled family members. "We're all going to get tested for compatibility, starting with me since I'm the oldest and most likely to be a good match." The assumption that everyone would naturally volunteer their organs for a man who had spent decades abusing his family was presented as such a foregone conclusion that questioning it would seem selfish and unnatural. The medical team's explanation of the kidney matching process revealed the complex science behind organ compatibility, involving tissue typing, blood work, and psychological evaluations designed to ensure that donors were making truly informed and voluntary decisions. Dr. Michael Torres, the transplant coordinator, was a kind and thorough professional who took time to explain the risks and benefits of donation while emphasizing that no family member should feel pressured to undergo major surgery against their better judgment. "The most important factor in a successful transplant is having a willing, psychologically stable donor," he explained. "Coercion or family pressure can create complications that affect both the donor and the recipient's long-term health outcomes." Derek's test results came back first, revealing that despite his robust health and superior genetics that our father had praised for decades, he was not a compatible match for kidney donation. The news hit him like a personal failure, as if his inability to save our father's life was another inadequacy to add to his previously perfect record. My mother's tests showed that while she shared some tissue compatibility, her age and her own health issues made her an unsuitable candidate for major surgery. The doctors were gentle but firm in explaining that organ donation required donors to be in excellent health themselves, ruling out anyone with significant medical conditions or age-related risk factors. The mounting pressure on me as the family's last hope for saving my father's life created an atmosphere of desperate manipulation that would have impressed professional interrogators. Suddenly, the same man who had called me a mistake for 32 years was claiming that I had always been his favorite child, that he had only been harsh with me because he saw so much potential and wanted to push me to achieve greatness. "I know I was tough on you, baby girl," he said with tears streaming down his face, "but it was because I believed in you more than anyone else. You were always the strongest one, the fighter. That's why I knew you could handle anything life threw at you. The rewriting of history was breathtaking in its audacity and heartbreaking in its transparent desperation. Derek's pressure campaign focused on positioning this as my opportunity to prove that I wasn't the selfish, ungrateful person our father had always claimed I was. "This is your chance to show that you're bigger than all the petty family drama," he argued during one of our private conversations in the hospital cafeteria. "You could literally save his life and prove that you're the better person. Think about how that would feel, knowing that you chose forgiveness over revenge." The irony of being asked to prove my worth through literal self-sacrifice to benefit the person who had spent decades trying to destroy my sense of self-worth was so perfect it felt like the universe was testing my sanity. My mother's tearful pleading represented the most emotionally manipulative aspect of the family's campaign to secure my kidney. "He's your father, honey," she repeated like a mantra designed to override rational thought and trigger deep-seated guilt about family obligations. "Whatever problems you've had with him, he's still the man who gave you life. Can you really live with yourself knowing you could have saved him and chose not to?" The emotional blackmail was expertly crafted to exploit every insecurity and guilty thought I had ever harbored about my relationship with my family, positioning any hesitation on my part as evidence of a fundamentally selfish and vindictive nature that proved my father's assessment of my character had been correct all along. The decision to undergo compatibility testing felt like stepping off a cliff while hoping that wings might spontaneously appear before impact, a surrender to family pressure that went against every instinct I had developed through years of protecting myself from their manipulation. The blood draws and tissue typing procedures were routine medical processes that I had performed on countless patients, but experiencing them as a potential organ donor carried emotional weight that made every needle stick feel symbolic of larger questions about family obligation, self-sacrifice, and the true meaning of love. Walking through the hospital corridors where I worked as a professional while simultaneously being evaluated as a potential kidney source created a surreal disconnect that left me questioning my identity and my agency in making this life-altering decision. The waiting period for test results stretched across 2 weeks that felt like 2 years, filled with carefully orchestrated family interactions designed to maintain pressure while creating an illusion of renewed closeness and mutual respect. My father's temporary transformation into a loving, appreciative parent was so complete that I began questioning my own memories of childhood abuse, wondering if trauma had somehow distorted my recollection of events and made me overly sensitive to normal parental discipline. His expressions of gratitude for my willingness to be tested, his claims that the medical crisis had given him perspective on what truly mattered in life, and his promises that our relationship would be completely different if he survived created a false hope that maybe, just maybe, serious illness had genuinely changed his heart. During this period, I threw myself into research about kidney donation with the obsessive thoroughness that had carried me through nursing school, learning everything I could about surgical procedures, recovery times, long-term health implications, and the psychological profiles of successful donor families. The medical literature revealed that living kidney donation was generally safe for healthy donors but required a lifetime of careful monitoring and carried small but real risks of complications including death during surgery, chronic kidney disease in the remaining organ, and various other medical issues that could affect quality of life. The decision was not one to be made lightly or under pressure, yet pressure was the dominant force shaping my family's approach to the entire situation. Support groups for potential organ donors provided a window into families dealing with similar medical crises, revealing both the beautiful generosity that could emerge from life-threatening illness and the ugly manipulation that desperate people sometimes employed to secure the organs they needed to survive. Some families had been brought closer together by the shared experience of facing mortality and choosing sacrifice, while others had been torn apart by resentment, guilt, and the burden of life-altering medical decisions made under duress. The stories of donors who later regretted their decisions because of ongoing family dysfunctions served as warnings about the importance of addressing underlying relationship problems before making irreversible medical commitments. Dr. Torres emerged as a crucial ally during this period, providing professional guidance that prioritized my well-being alongside the medical necessities of transplant evaluation. His approach to informed consent went far beyond the legal requirements, including conversations about family dynamics, motivation for donation, and long-term expectations that revealed his understanding of the psychological complexities involved in living organ donation. The most successful transplants happen when donors feel genuinely supported and valued by their families, he explained during one of our consultations. If there's a history of difficult relationships or unresolved conflict, those issues often become magnified after surgery when the donor is vulnerable and needs care themselves. The envelope containing my test results arrived on a Tuesday morning when I was working a double shift in the emergency department, dealing with the controlled chaos of heart attacks, car accidents, and drug overdoses that filled our trauma bays with human suffering and medical drama. My hands trembled as I opened the official hospital correspondence that would determine whether my father lived or died, whether my family would continue their manipulation campaign or move on to other potential sources of organs, and whether I would face the most difficult decision of my adult life. The technical language of medical compatibility testing revealed what I had somehow known instinctively. I was a perfect match for kidney donation, with tissue compatibility scores that made transplant surgery almost guaranteed to succeed. The family celebration that followed the announcement of my perfect compatibility felt hollow and calculated, like a scripted performance designed to generate enthusiasm for a decision that everyone assumed had already been made on my behalf. Derek raised a champagne toast to our family hero, my mother cried with relief and gratitude, and my father looked at me with what appeared to be genuine love and appreciation for the first time in my adult memory. The attention and approval felt intoxicating after a lifetime of criticism and dismissal, creating a dangerous emotional high that temporarily obscured the more rational concerns about whether this decision was truly mine to make or simply the inevitable conclusion of 32 years of family programming about my role as the person responsible for fixing everyone else's problems. However, my father's personality began shifting back to his familiar patterns almost immediately after the celebration ended, as if the confirmation of my compatibility had eliminated his need to maintain the pretense of changed behavior. Demands replaced requests, expectations replaced gratitude, and the old familiar tone of entitlement crept back into his voice when he discussed the upcoming surgery. "You'll do this, and we'll call everything even," he announced during a family dinner, as if my potential life-saving sacrifice was simply payment on a debt I had accumulated through the audacity of existing. "All the money I spent raising you, all the times I had to deal with your problems, this will square the books between us." Growing suspicion about my family's financial honesty led me to investigate further into the documents I had discovered in my father's office, revealing layers of deception that went far beyond hidden medical records. Property investment documents showed that my father owned several rental properties throughout the Denver metro area, generating monthly income that he had concealed from the family for years. Bank statements revealed investment accounts with balances that would have eliminated the financial struggles that had defined my childhood and young adulthood. The man who had claimed we couldn't afford my college education while spending my grandmother's inheritance on Derek's law school had been sitting on assets worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Derek's law firm had handled much of my father's financial planning and asset management, meaning my brother had been fully aware of our father's true financial situation while watching me work 3 jobs to pay for nursing school and struggle to afford basic necessities. The discovery that both men had allowed me to suffer financially while resources were readily available felt like the cruelest betrayal yet, revealing that my poverty and struggle had been manufactured by people who could have easily provided assistance but chose not to. The fifth betrayal cut deeper than all the others because it exposed the calculated nature of my family's treatment, proving that my suffering had been a deliberate choice rather than an unfortunate consequence of limited resources. Armed with documentation of years of financial deception and a newfound understanding of my family's true motivations, I called a family meeting that would finally shift the power dynamic that had controlled my entire life. The evidence was spread across Derek's dining room table like exhibits in a criminal trial: property deeds, bank statements, investment records, and insurance documents that painted a clear picture of wealth hidden while I struggled in poverty. My father's face went white as he realized that his carefully constructed lies were crumbling before his eyes, while Derek frantically tried to calculate how much legal trouble his role in the deception might have created. My mother simply stared at the documents with confusion and dawning horror as she understood how completely she had been manipulated by both men. "You want to talk about debts?" I said, my voice steady with a calm that surprised even me. "Let's discuss the trust fund from Grandmother Elizabeth that was supposed to pay for my education. Let's talk about the rental income you've been collecting for 15 years while I worked 3 jobs to afford community college. Let's examine the investment accounts that could have prevented every financial struggle I've ever experienced." The transformation from victim to prosecutor felt like stepping into a role I had been born to play, using my voice to advocate for myself with the same fierce determination I brought to advocating for my patients in medical crises. My father's rage exploded with the volcanic fury of someone whose carefully constructed world of control and manipulation was collapsing around him. "You ungrateful mistake!" he screamed, his face turning purple with the kind of apoplectic anger I had witnessed throughout childhood but now viewed through adult eyes that could recognize it as the tantrum of a caught liar rather than justified parental authority. "I don't owe you anything. Everything I did was legal, and you can't prove otherwise. If you don't help me now, you're no daughter of mine." The threats that had terrorized me as a child now sounded like the desperate bargaining of someone who had lost all power to hurt me further. Derek's attempts at damage control revealed his panic about potential professional consequences if my father's financial manipulation became public knowledge. "This isn't about money, Cass," he said with the smooth lawyer voice he used for difficult clients. "This is about family and doing the right thing when someone's life is on the line. Whatever Dad did with his finances doesn't change the fact that he needs medical help right now." The man who had benefited from our father's favoritism for decades was now trying to minimize the significance of financial fraud while positioning himself as the voice of moral reason, conveniently forgetting his own role in enabling and concealing the deception. My mother's weak attempts to defend the men who had manipulated her for years crumbled under direct questioning about what she had actually known versus what she had chosen to ignore. "I just trusted your father to handle the money," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she confronted her own role in my suffering. "I never asked questions because I didn't want to cause problems in the marriage. I thought he was doing what was best for everyone." Her admission of willful ignorance felt like another betrayal, revealing that my childhood poverty could have been prevented if any adult in my life had possessed the courage to ask difficult questions or demand accountability. The power shift in our family dynamic became complete when I stood up from the table and delivered the words that would change everything between us forever. "You want my kidney?" I said, meeting my father's desperate eyes with unwavering resolve. "Here are my terms. Complete financial disclosure, family therapy for everyone, public admission of the lies you've told about me, and a formal apology for 32 years of emotional abuse. You'll also be paying back every dollar of my grandmother's trust fund with interest, and compensating me for the education expenses I incurred because of your theft." The demands were non-negotiable, delivered with the calm authority of someone who had finally realized that she held all the cards in this particular game. My father's threats intensified as he realized that the daughter he had trained to be submissive and compliant had transformed into someone who could not be intimidated or controlled. "If you don't help me, you're no daughter of mine," he repeated, as if disowning me would carry the same devastating impact it might have had when I was a desperate child seeking his approval. "I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of selfish, vindictive person you really are. Your career will be over, your reputation will be destroyed, and you'll never have another moment of peace in this city." The man who was asking for my organ to save his life was simultaneously threatening to destroy my life if I didn't comply with his demands immediately. My response came from a place of strength I didn't know existed within me. "I stopped being your daughter years ago when you chose to be my abuser instead of my father," I said with quiet certainty. "Your threats can't hurt me anymore because I've already survived the worst you can do. I've built a career despite your sabotage, found love despite your efforts to destroy it, and discovered my own worth despite your attempts to convince me I was worthless. The only power you have left is the power I choose to give you, and today I choose to give you none. Legal consultation with a family law attorney revealed that while my father's financial manipulation might not rise to the level of criminal fraud, it certainly constituted a breach of fiduciary duty regarding my grandmother's trust fund that could be pursued through civil litigation. The attorney was particularly interested in the documented pattern of financial control and emotional abuse, suggesting that these factors could support claims for intentional infliction of emotional distress and potentially criminal charges related to financial elder abuse if my grandmother had been manipulated near the end of her life. The legal options provided additional leverage in negotiations, but more importantly, they validated my perception that real wrongs had been committed against me that deserved acknowledgement and restitution. Dr. Torres's support for my right to make an informed, pressure-free decision about organ donation proved crucial as family members and even some hospital staff began questioning my motivations and moral character. Any donor who feels coerced or manipulated is at higher risk for both surgical complications and long-term psychological problems, he explained to my family during a formal consultation session. Cassandra has the absolute right to take time to consider this decision without pressure, and she also has the right to decline donation for any reason she deems appropriate. Organs from reluctant donors have lower success rates because the psychological stress affects the donor's healing and the family's ability to provide appropriate post-surgical support. The psychological evaluation required for all potential donors revealed the extent of family trauma and manipulation that had shaped my entire life, providing professional validation for experiences I had sometimes questioned or minimized. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the transplant program's staff psychologist, spent hours documenting the history of emotional abuse, financial manipulation, and family coercion that had brought me to this moment of decision. Her report recommended additional counseling and a cooling-off period before any final decisions were made about surgery, emphasizing that my psychological well-being was just as important as my physical compatibility in determining whether donation would be successful for everyone involved. The media attention that followed my story created an unexpected platform for discussing the complex dynamics of family abuse and medical coercion that many people preferred to ignore or minimize. A local television reporter picked up the story after someone leaked details about the family conflict surrounding my father's transplant needs, and the subsequent coverage sparked conversations about organ donation ethics that extended far beyond our personal situation. Viewers called the station to share their own experiences with manipulative family members who had demanded organs, money, or other sacrifices while providing nothing but abuse in return. My father's reputation in our tight-knit Denver community crumbled as neighbors and acquaintances learned about his treatment of me and began reassessing their own interactions with him over the years. Derek's law firm moved quickly to distance itself from any potential scandal involving financial manipulation and family fraud, quietly transferring my brother to a different practice group and conducting an internal review of all cases he had handled involving family members or personal financial relationships. The professional consequences served as a wake-up call that forced Derek to confront his own role in enabling our father's behavior and benefiting from the family's dysfunctional dynamics. For the first time in our adult lives, my brother was experiencing negative consequences for choices related to our family situation, creating an opportunity for genuine reflection about whether he wanted to continue perpetuating patterns that had caused so much harm. My mother's heart attack during the height of the family crisis nearly derailed all the progress we had made toward honest communication and accountability, creating another test of my ability to maintain boundaries while still responding with compassion to genuine medical emergencies. Unlike my father's manipulative health crisis, my mother's heart problems were clearly stress-related and potentially fatal, requiring immediate medical intervention and long-term cardiac care that would change her life significantly. Despite everything she had done to enable my father's abuse, I found myself rushing to the hospital and advocating for her medical care with the same fierce determination I brought to protecting my own interests. The family therapy sessions that became a condition of my considering organ donation exposed decades of toxic patterns that had infected every relationship within our household. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, our family therapist, specialized in working with families affected by addiction, abuse, and financial manipulation, and she refused to allow anyone to minimize or excuse the behaviors that had created our current crisis. My father was forced to acknowledge specific instances of emotional abuse while my mother had to confront her role in enabling destructive patterns rather than protecting her children. Derek's participation was reluctant initially, but he gradually began understanding how his favored status had blinded him to the suffering of others in the family. My conditional agreement to proceed with kidney donation came only after months of intensive therapy, full financial disclosure, and genuine evidence of changed behavior from family members who had previously seemed incapable of growth or accountability. The conditions were non-negotiable. My father had to complete alcohol addiction treatment, attend individual therapy for anger management, make full financial restitution for my grandmother's trust fund, and publicly acknowledge his past treatment of me. My mother had to address her enabling behaviors through counseling and demonstrate consistent support for my boundaries rather than her husband's demands. Derek had to make his own financial amends and commit to ongoing family therapy to address sibling dynamics that had been poisoned by decades of favoritism and competition. My father's choice between his pride and his survival became the defining moment that would determine whether our family had any chance of healing or would remain forever fractured by years of accumulated damage and resentment. The man who had spent 32 years refusing to admit any wrongdoing was confronted with the reality that his life literally depended on acknowledging his failures and committing to fundamental changes in his behavior and attitude. The process was agonizing for someone whose identity was built on being right and in control, but the alternative was death, making the choice between transformation and destruction starkly clear in ways that no amount of family pressure could have achieved. The genuine apology that finally emerged after months of therapy represented a breakthrough that I had never believed possible, delivered with tears and vulnerability that revealed the broken person hidden beneath years of angry bluster and defensive manipulation. I was so afraid of being seen as weak or inadequate that I made you the target for all my own self-hatred, my father admitted during one of our joint therapy sessions. You were never the mistake, Cassandra. I was the mistake, and I spent your entire childhood trying to convince you that my failures were your fault. I'm sorry for every cruel word, every moment I made you feel unwanted, and every opportunity one stole from you because of my own fears and selfishness. The kidney donation surgery proceeded with proper medical protocols, psychological support, and family members who had committed to providing appropriate post-surgical care based on genuine concern rather than obligation or guilt. The recovery period brought unexpected opportunities for healing as family members learned to interact without the toxic dynamics that had defined our relationships for decades. My father's gratitude was mixed with ongoing work in therapy to address the underlying issues that had made him an abusive parent, while my mother focused on developing her own voice and opinions rather than automatically deferring to her husband's demands and manipulations. The romantic relationship that developed naturally with Dr. Torres represented the first healthy partnership I had ever experienced, built on mutual respect, honest communication, and shared values rather than desperation, manipulation, or family pressure. Michael understood the complexity of my family situation without trying to fix or control it, providing steady support while respecting my agency in making decisions about how much contact and involvement I wanted to maintain with relatives who had caused me so much pain. Our relationship grew slowly and organically, based on genuine compatibility and affection rather than the traumatic bonding and rescue fantasies that had characterized my previous romantic experiences. Starting a scholarship fund for survivors of family abuse became my way of transforming personal pain into something that could help other people escape similar situations and build better lives for themselves. The fund provided financial assistance for education and counseling services, helping young adults who had been financially cut off by abusive families or who needed support in establishing independence from toxic family systems. Working with other survivors created a community of understanding and mutual support that helped me continue processing my own experiences while contributing to solutions that could prevent similar suffering for future generations. My mother's individual therapy journey led to remarkable changes in her personality and self-confidence as she learned to express opinions, make decisions, and advocate for herself rather than automatically deferring to the men in her life. The heart attack had served as a wake-up call about the health consequences of living in constant stress and anxiety, motivating her to address relationship patterns that had kept her trapped in a submissive role for decades. Our relationship gradually improved as she developed the strength to acknowledge her mistakes and commit to supporting my boundaries rather than pressuring me to accommodate everyone else's demands and expectations. Derek's financial amends represented more than money. They constituted an admission that he had benefited from systems of favoritism and financial manipulation that had harmed his sister while advancing his own interests. His participation in ongoing family therapy revealed someone who was capable of growth and change when confronted with the true costs of his previous behavior. Though rebuilding trust between us remained a gradual process that required consistent demonstration of new patterns over extended periods of time. The sibling relationship that emerged was different from anything we had ever shared, based on mutual respect rather than competition for parental approval. My father's ongoing gratitude for the kidney donation was tempered by continued work in therapy to address the personality traits and defensive mechanisms that had made him an abusive parent throughout my childhood. The medical crisis had provided motivation for change, but lasting transformation required daily choices to respond differently to stress, criticism, and perceived threats to his ego or control. His progress was genuine but imperfect, marked by setbacks and struggles that reminded everyone that personality change is a lifetime process rather than a single dramatic conversion experience. The life lesson that emerged from this experience was both simple and profound. Family relationships must be based on mutual respect and genuine care rather than obligation, manipulation, or traditional roles that enable abuse to continue across generations. I learned that setting boundaries and demanding accountability wasn't selfish or vindictive, but rather the foundation for any healthy relationship worth maintaining. Love without respect is just manipulation disguised with prettier words, and no one owes their abusers continued access to hurt them simply because they happen to share genetic material or legal family relationships. The future that stretched ahead held possibilities I had never dared to imagine during the darkest periods of family crisis and personal despair. Professional success in nursing, meaningful romantic partnership, friendships based on mutual care rather than trauma bonding, and a family that was learning to function with honesty and respect rather than manipulation and control. The work of healing would continue for all of us, but it was work being done by people who had chosen growth over comfort, truth over convenience, and love over the familiar patterns that had caused so much damage for so many years. My final reflection on this journey emphasized that the greatest gift I had given wasn't my kidney, but rather my refusal to accept treatment that diminished my worth and dignity as a human being. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for dysfunctional family members is to refuse to enable their destructive behaviors by setting firm boundaries and demanding better treatment. True family relationships require mutual effort and respect, and no amount of genetic connection or shared history justifies accepting abuse or sacrificing your own well-being for people who refuse to acknowledge your basic human worth. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where family members expected you to sacrifice your well-being for people who had never shown you basic respect or kindness? I'd love to hear your thoughts about family boundaries and how you've handled difficult relatives in your own life. Drop a comment below sharing your experiences or advice for others dealing with similar family dynamics. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help other people find it who might be struggling with their own family situations. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family trauma and building healthier relationships. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they have the right to demand better treatment from the people who claim to love them. Thank you for taking this emotional journey with me, and remember that you are worthy of love and respect regardless of what anyone in your family has told you. Stay strong, set those boundaries, and never stop believing that you deserve relationships built on genuine care rather than obligation and manipulation.